What is an effective limit for regulations on any general circumstances? Are there any fundamental objective regulations that should always be in place? If there were objective regulations, then they would be relative to an action that all individuals should or should not take. By definition, a regulation is basically a rule outlining a specified action that should or shouldn't be taken. In my previous video called Deserved Degree, I talked about how the concept of something that should be done is subjective unless outlined in context. There seems to be no actions that should be done which are generally objective, since there is no universal, definitive agreement fundamental to general existence. Relative to existence, an individual always has the potential to disagree on a preference of intended goal as a resulting effect of that action, which is the factor in question for whether it should be taken. An agreeing upon intended goal is required for an action to be objective in determining whether it should be taken. This concept carries over to the application of regulations, considering regulations describe that which should be done. A common agreed upon intended accomplishment which seems to be reasonable for a functional society and for a common preference might be to allow maximum enjoyment of all individuals. If this is taken as the context, there can be an objective action to be taken in any circumstances in order to attempt to accomplish the intended goal. Granted, it can be very difficult to determine the action which should be taken in order to accomplish this result, but this can be a contextual goal to base best estimates off of for concepts such as deserving entitlement or regulations. So what are effective regulations to attempt to achieve this hypothetical goal for society? In general, it seems regulations restrict people from taking action which reduces the enjoyment for others. But to be effective for this goal, the regulation should restrict only the specific action which reduces others' enjoyment. A blanket barricading regulation is generalized to prevent everyone from performing an action which only has the potential to be used to take a further action that is negative in the context. In this case, the generalized restriction prevents the enjoyment for some people, even though they would not have taken the consecutive action, which is negative. This seems to be a growing trend in society of creating blanket barricading regulations. For example, if someone drowns in a quarry in a public conservation area, the typical reaction seems to be to then make a regulation that nobody is allowed to swim in that quarry any longer. Or perhaps, if someone falls through ice, no longer allow skating on ponds anywhere in the city. The idealism is to prevent future people from being hurt, reducing their enjoyment and their families. But the regulation restricts the enjoyment for all those who would take that initial action of swimming or skating, but not take the consecutive negative action of drowning. Instead of a regulation which restricts enjoyment for others, perhaps the regulation should be focused on the problem of drowning. This is likely difficult to do, other than perhaps putting up signs warning people of the danger, but at least it would not be counterproductive in restricting alternate enjoyment. Freedom should be a fairly common preference for enjoyment, and therefore a component of the contextual intended goal of society. And if people are allowed this freedom, they have the choice to take the risks themselves. If blanket barricading regulations are put in place, restricting freedom of particular actions, the individuals restricted from that action are additionally prevented from learning skills and concepts related to that action. When learning these skills and concepts is prevented, the person is then unable to transfer that knowledge or those abilities to alternate situations. They are then more likely to fail or be harmed, reducing their enjoyment in a future scenario involving relatable concepts, since they don't have the applicable skills or knowledge. For example, if a regulation is put into place to require crossing guards to always stop traffic for children crossing the street, and the children must cross at that spot, the children may never learn the concept of giving cars the right of way, or the skills to judge when it is safe to cross. At another time, when there is no crossing guard, a child might just cross a road right in front of traffic, and make the assumption that it is normal, without the learned skills of independently awarefully crossing the street. I've actually witnessed this at a crosswalk right in front of my house. Overall, it seems logical that regulations should be heeded in the effect of their restrictions. If it's a regulation which blankets generalized circumstances only on the potential of a consecutive negative action being taken, then the side effect causing the restriction of freedom of others is counterproductive. Perhaps in today's society, the best implementation in the context of allowing enjoyment should be regulation reduction.